Please hold those up at the close of our speakers' comments, and staff will collect those and bring them up to the head table. Tom Walsh is the general manager of TriMet. Fine. He could spend his working hours just making sure that the buses run on time and fighting off attempts by the public to encroach on his agency's turf. But thank goodness our metropolitan area is luckier than that. Tom Walsh's timetables aren't measured in minutes to the end of the line, but in years and decades ahead to a well-planned, livable metropolitan environment for us and for the hundreds of thousands of others who will join us here in coming years. Transportation, in the form of streetcar lines, made the neighborhoods of Portland earlier this century. Transportation, in the form of urban freeways and traffic arterials, nearly killed the downtown waterfront at mid-century. Tom Walsh believed that transportation, largely the East and West Side light rail lines, can be a central piece in Portland's evolution into an American urban model for the coming century. He's probably right, but it won't happen without planning, and Tom Walsh has taken up that banner as well. Now, here's a shocker for you. Tom Walsh, white knight of enlightened, forward-looking growth management, is by professional background in league with land developers. Yes, but it may be that developers have taken a bum rap with people like this hanging around with them. Mr. Walsh grew up in Portland. He graduated from Lincoln High, received an engineering degree from Stanford University, and then came back to Portland, where he founded and for 30 years was a principal in Walsh Construction. He has served on state transportation and planning commissions, and as we all know, the salaries for that are a princely zero, and he has headed the advisory committee that saw the Oregon Convention Center through to completion as well. Last year, an international search for a new general manager for TriMet led to Tom Walsh's door right here in our backyard. And since last July, he has been at the helm of TriMet. So, with his topic of a vision for a livable community, please join me in welcoming TriMet's general manager, Mr. Tom Walsh.
Jim is right. It doesn't matter whether you're for or against, but please make up your minds, just one side or the other. I always am reminded when I see a room which is slightly short of seating capacity of the story from a little over a decade ago when my friend Frank Ivansy was mayor, and someone said, "Frank, what are your thoughts on expanding Memorial Coliseum?" He said, "I'm strongly in favor of it." And they said, "Why?" And he said, "I think there ought to be a place in Portland where all of Walsh's creditors could gather under one roof." As we start a discussion today, and it's a discussion which will go on in this community for 2 decades that talks about vision and talks about livability and some community values, I need on a moment and on a somber note to pause. There's already been a reference made to the tragedy of yesterday morning, and simply to set a tone for values that I hold most importantly, I would conclude by saying that nothing we talk about today, no spark which might talk about our future in my set of personal values in any way replaces the loss of real vision yesterday. We'll talk about a livable community. Many of us have dreams for that. But in the loss of Nathan Thomas yesterday morning, this community lost an invaluable resource. What we live for and the things we care about are for our young people, and we are sobered by that. I want to talk about the need today for this region to develop a shared vision for a livable community. We're at a crossroads, a point of opportunity in our growth and our development for this great area, but we're facing a critical choice. We are either going to become the masters of change or its victims. The question is, are we going to think through and plan for the future we want for this very special community of ours, or are we going to let the forces of growth simply overrun us? That eminent American philosopher Yogi Berra used to say, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. Great advice, Yogi, but what we must ask ourselves today is, which path do we want to take? Today I'd like to discuss some of the alternatives. First, some thoughts on where we stand today in terms of livability, then how a few other cities have dealt with growth and what we can learn from them, and finally, where we here in Portland might go. In my mind, a livable community has 3 parts. its physical parts, its cultural and human values, and its economic attributes. I want to focus today just on those physical aspects of a livable community, not by any means to exclude the others, but rather simply to narrow our focus. The fact is, the physical part of our livable community is facing substantial threats. First among those is our population growth. Oregon's population is growing at twice the national average. Last year alone, Washington County grew by 5.7%. At that rate, in the next 5 years, Washington County will add another 100,000 residents, the equivalent of 2 Beavertons. Region-wide, 500,000 more residents are expected to join us here by the year 2010. That's roughly the same amount of growth we had between 1950 and 1990, but occurring in half the time. The big question is, where are we going to put all these people? Some of them are daughters and our sons. We're already starting to bump up against the urban growth boundary and the pressures that stem from it. Much of those are caused by the fact that development inside the boundary is occurring at only about 2/3 of planned densities. Another threat to this physical community is our literally exploding traffic congestion. Residents in Washington and Clackamas County, when interviewed recently in a survey, listed traffic as their #1 concern. Westside Light Rail will alleviate some of the traffic in Washington County, but it is an improvement mainly needed to keep congestion from getting any worse. A recent ODOT study projects that 2.5 million additional daily trips will be taken in this region 20 years from now. TriMet's analysis shows that almost 100% of those trips would have to be taken on transit if we were to keep congestion from reaching stop-and-go levels on all major arterials during rush hours. To put that in a context, TriMet today carries only 4% of the trips taken in this region. At the same time, we see a lagging investment in our infrastructure, transportation, wastewater, storm sewers, and other utilities. The city of Portland needs $1 billion today just to get its current sewer system up to standards. Statewide, our transportation needs face a $19 billion shortfall if we are to restore and maintain our deteriorating road system. Nearly half of that particular need, which is unmet, occurs in the Portland metropolitan area. If you add up everybody's wish list for highways, transit systems, utilities needed to support that additional 500,000 people who will come to join us, you come to a total of $23 billion as a tab facing this region. If you just distribute that across the 1 million people currently in the Tri-County area, we're talking about $23,000 per person to pay for the systems needed to support growth. That's not exactly a free lunch. So we're likely to fall short on those infrastructure improvements, and the question is, by how much? The more compactly we grow, the better we'll do. All of these costs very clearly are cheaper the more compact the development we have and the less sprawl. Air quality is another area of concern. The number of vehicle miles traveled in the Portland region has been growing at over 6% a year. To stay current with federal clean air guidelines, we'll need to reduce that to barely over 2% a year or face tough federal mandates which will force our compliance. The point is that all of these threats can be overcome. It all depends on how we grow. Traffic congestion and air pollution are not an inevitable part of growth. They are simply the result of growing the wrong way. And no better example exists than downtown Portland of the way to do it right. The key elements in the success story of downtown Portland were the development of a downtown plan and an investment in transit. Our downtown area has grown from 56,000 jobs in 1975 to 86,000 jobs today, an increase of over 50%. And at the same time, air quality has improved dramatically and traffic congestion has been slightly reduced. And with a little will and a lot of imagination, all of these threats can be turned into opportunities. That happens to be our specialty here in this region. We are known for getting ahead of change and turning change to our advantage. That's one of the reasons Portland today is the last unspoiled major urban area in the United States. We have a golden opportunity to show that it is possible for a major urban area to grow without losing its charm, that urban sprawl, gridlock, and central city decay are not inevitable, that an economic boom needn't mean a livability bust. We also have the opportunity to learn from others. Phoenix, Los Angeles, and Seattle, to cite three, provide some valuable lessons for us in what not to do. All three are examples of paradise lost. Cities once considered jewels in America's crown that have since lost their unique appeal. All three have expanded out, not up. Their suburbs have grown at the expense of their central cities, and their metropolitan areas today are choking on traffic congestion and air pollution. The story of Seattle is especially insightful, and I might add, truly sad. In the course of a decade, the 1980s, Seattle went from being one of the most livable cities in the entire country to the sixth worst congested. So how did it happen? The Puget Sound area went through a period of very, very rapid growth in the 1980s. During that decade, the Seattle metropolitan region alone gained over 500,000 people. But the region had no overall vision and no strong planning to guide its growth. The result was urban sprawl. While the population grew by 38% in the 2 decades from 1970 to 1990, the amount of land that was consumed by or surrounded by urban development increased at almost 2.5 times that, or 87%. The number of vehicle miles traveled increased 136%, 4 times the rate of population growth. At the same time, the level of funding for transportation dropped in terms of real dollars. Seattle is now trying to play catch-up, but the costs are enormous. The city has identified the need for more than $30 billion in operation, capital, and maintenance needs for transportation improvements alone, but a $30 billion expenditure which will not improve congestion above today's levels, but simply keeping it from getting significantly worse. I've said before, and I would repeat it here again today, if you want to see what Seattle will look like in 20 years, go to Los Angeles. Other cities have managed growth differently with far more positive results. My two favorites are Vancouver, British Columbia, and Toronto. They planned ahead for their growth. Both have been able to grow without losing their character and their appeal. Toronto is an especially striking example. I had the opportunity with Bob Post and Bruce Harder to visit that lovely city last October. Interestingly enough, Toronto has grown at just about the same rate as Los Angeles, but it has only a single freeway at its core. It's grown in what we would regard as a non-traditional way, up, not out, through density, not through sprawl. The city has a little over 2 million people. 25% of all trips taken in that region are by transit. Compared to the Portland region, Toronto has twice the population, 4 times the density, and 10 times the transit ridership. Its transit network consists of subways, light rail systems, streetcars, trolleybuses, taxicabs, commuter trains, and pedestrians. The provincial government in Ontario is very effective in encouraging compact development. It doesn't prohibit growth outside the metropolitan area. It just doesn't provide roads or transit to serve it. And the contrast between Toronto and Seattle are both striking and compelling. They raise fundamental questions for us in Portland. What do we want this metropolitan area to look like 25 years from now? Do we want to control our future or be controlled by it? Many groups in this region have tried and continue to try to address the future in their own impressive ways. To cite just a few, Portland Future Focus, the Central City Plan, Metro 2040, the city's regional rail program, and most recently, Envisioning Gresham, efforts that, among others, deserve real applause. The City Club itself produced an outstanding visionary work in May of 1980 entitled Report on a Vision for Portland's Future. Clearly, we have no shortage of vision in this community. The shortage is in agreement and in action. We as a region have not yet agreed on a clear, cohesive pattern of what we want to be and what we want to look like as we grow. And the message I bring you today is that it's time to create that collective vision. We need to start today, and we need to complete it soon. I say that because, judging by the experience of other cities, we have literally only 3 or 4 years to do that task. Then the choice will be made for us, not by us. Los Angeles is the way it is today, not because people want it that way, but because they missed the chance to make their choice. Seattle had its opportunity to choose in the mid-1970s. Now, instead of driving toward the future they want, they're spending all their time looking at life in the rearview mirror, wondering, what did we hit? If we don't make our choice, if we don't get ahead of change, the forces of growth will push us toward irreversible sprawl. We're already starting in that direction. If we were to succeed in implementing all of the current land use plans and transportation plans we today have on the books, we would still have 85% of all growth in this region occurring outside the Portland city limits, and we would more than double the levels of traffic congestion. That's not a very pretty forecast. Let me suggest an alternative. If you'll bear with me for a minute, suppose 2 decades from now, we lived in an area that looked like this. It's a thriving urban area with some 2 million people, compact, though not crowded, set off from surrounding farm and forest lands by a distinct, unchanging urban growth boundary. Within the urban area, there are plenty of parks and open spaces, but little vacant land left sitting neglected. Most of the buildings are low to mid-rise. Development is concentrated along major transit corridors and the region's 4 light rail lines. 2 more lines are actually getting underway. Land use and transportation have been carefully planned and integrated to make it easy to get around. Compact urban villages have been developed around all major transit stops. These consist of everything from a major regional shopping center to an industrial site to a mixed-use center offering affordable housing, as well as employment, retail, and cultural activities. 1 million trips a day are taken on transit. The average commute to work takes 20 minutes. The lifestyle of the region is more urban than suburban. Despite considerable growth, it's an area that has retained a neighborly feel to it. The city is bustling, but it also provides for citizens quiet time. In that Portland, unlike most American cities, people spend their interludes of quiet in parks, in open spaces, along rivers and in museums, rather than entombed in lonely autos, stuck in traffic jams. I've just described a vision that we at TriMet believe best ensures the mobility and livability as this region grows. Our mission, as we see it, is to enhance everyone's mobility within this region. We plan to do that through major initiatives that boost ridership, improve customer service, and strengthen our partnership with land use authorities to achieve a pattern of compact development. But ultimately, pursuing our separate vision just won't work. Transportation is just one piece of the puzzle, and transportation needs to follow, not lead, the land use plans that reflect this community's vision for itself. The Westside project provides a good example. We begin final engineering literally in 2 weeks on the Westside light rail line. It is an absolutely exciting project, to be sure, but unless it becomes part of an overall strategy for growth, it's a $1 billion investment in pursuit of a vision we've not yet set. So what do we do next? I want to suggest 3 things. First, we begin immediately to develop a mechanism for the private and public interest in this region to come together. Their job would be to deliberate the choice at hand and secure a vision that is understood, supported, and implemented by leaders in the region as well as by private citizens. Second, that we take the steps to achieve that vision. The region should, through Metro, adopt a truly comprehensive land use plan that fits the adopted vision. After that, and only after that, would come the transportation and utility plans to support the land use plan and to provide the funding to make it real. And as a third and final step, while we're in the process of deliberating that regional vision, Let's stop the current slide to suburban sprawl. My favorite, let's just freeze the urban growth boundary. Once we've decided our vision, if need be, we can go back and adjust that boundary. But until then, let's declare a moratorium on sprawl. As for freezing the urban growth boundary, to quote what Mark Twain once said about Wagner's music, it's not as bad as it sounds. The area within our region's boundary can easily accommodate our projected growth over the next 20 years. If the city of Portland alone builds the densities which are called for in its comprehensive plan, we have the ability to accommodate 400,000 new residents just within the city limits. If the light rail system region-wide is implemented, villages at 100 light rail stations could accommodate another 300,000 people. We have the capacity to grow within our boundaries. It means higher densities, but not high rises. It means densities like what you would see today along Hawthorne Boulevard or Northwest 23rd Avenue, not a vision of a Chicago or a New York. There is a special place in all of this for City Club leadership. This club ranks among the city's foremost advocates for looking ahead and pursuing bold new ideas. Your 1980 report, which I referred to earlier, is an excellent example. It called for the following: a performing arts center, a convention center, a government with a more regional focus, an expanded OMSI, and a growing children's museum, promenades, shops, and housing along the waterfront, a joining of the East Side with the central business district, and I might add, it also called for neighborhoods clustered around light rail stations. You suggested all of those. You have been the precursor to change. Most of that has come. The City Club report also noted, and I quote, "National and international forces will change Portland to an unrecognizable megalopolis if we are not vision-oriented and firm in our resolve to accomplish this vision." End quote. If ever there was a perfect organization to spearhead our regional vision, it is this one, the City Club of Portland. Precisely because you have no specific authority and no vested interest in the issue beyond the overall livability of this community, the City Club has an unparalleled opportunity to lead the way, to define the process for determining our regional vision, to suggest the specific steps, and to recommend a schedule to complete the task within no more than 36 months. As Peter Drucker once said, we develop goals or a vision not so we know what to do in the future, but so we know what to do today. You can help lead us through the proper forum for debating our vision, so that the outcome is not one more study or one more report, but the definitive pronouncement. I challenge you today to take that initiative and to guide this region forward. In conclusion, I would say simply, the clock is ticking. Let me cite one last quote from an illuminating 7-part series of articles on managing growth that ran in the Seattle Times barely 2 years ago. It was written by Neil Pierce and a team of urban experts who had evaluated that city's problems and potential. There is an eerie sense of premonition in the conclusion offered by the Times editors. Quote, "The traffic jam hasn't replaced Mount Rainier, the Space Needle, Douglas fir, or salmon as a symbol of the Puget Sound area. But then there was a time when Los Angeles County was symbolized by orange groves rather than freeways and smog. It is too late for Los Angeles. It may be too late for Seattle, but it is not too late for us. As my favorite Kennedy once said, the future is not completely beyond our control. It is the work of our own hands. For your help and for your thoughtfulness, thank you."
Thank you, Mr. Walsh, for those comments, that challenge to City Club. We hear what you're saying. I hope we can live up to it.
You
First-
can.
Thank you. First question today is for Ross Simmons, board host. Ross?
Thanks, Jim. Tom, I recall a time not too long ago when many of the values that you talked about had a very vivid, growing acceptance in the community. It was the late 1970s and the 1980s, early 1980s, when the price of gasoline went up dramatically. And suddenly the kinds of things that you talked about literally hit home for everybody, hit the pocketbook. In light of that, to help spur some of these ideals, do you favor an increase in gasoline taxes? Or if not, do you see other measures that make transportation more expensive the way we do it today?
Ross, I would strongly support not a modest but a rather dramatic increase in all forms of transportation taxes. The hidden subsidies that we as a civilization pay for transportation are simply enormous. If we look even to the north, gasoline prices in Canada are well over $2 a gallon. Throughout Western Europe, they range between $3.50 and $4.50 per gallon. We have a cultural ethic in this country, driven mostly by the West, that says gasoline prices must be very cheap. We will and we need to change that.
Bob Borth for our second question.
Yes, thank you. I'm at the against microphone, but I can assure you that I'm not against what you
That's okay.
have been
That's
speaking
okay.
about. So I'll put that down. Your concept for increased density concentrations along transportation corridors is interesting and intriguing, and one which I think our Transportation and Land Use Committee generally supports. I've done a bit of a calculation myself, and the math does work. If you take the 500,000 people that you project and at a modest density, at least in my mind, of say 20 units per acre, you could put that on say 5% or so of the UGB area. The math does work. The question that I have, however, is if you look at this room and think of all of us, most folks still like that house out in the meadow with the grass and so forth. People fear, or some people fear, the higher densities that you speak of, and they want it for other people. How do we really get folks to accept higher density living in the United States of America?
It'll be difficult, and I think probably the first step in that is to point out that it is a matter of choice. We can accept one of three choices in this region. Our sons and daughters will live elsewhere and there will be no growth in population. Or another choice is that we will all have that very low density suburban lifestyle that many enjoy and will grow from Estacada to the summit of the Coast Range. Or a third choice is that we'll stay compact and we'll make some adjustments. The increase in density has been slow to be accepted in the western United States, but it is coming. I would cite simply the example of the urban stretches of the Willamette River, stretching from Bill NATO's project on the north to River Place on the south. In literally not more than a dozen years, there's come to be real acceptance, not for everyone, but for some, of a changing lifestyle. John Gray's development further south on the Willamette River is yet another example. Will it come in tidal waves? No. But is it coming slowly? I strongly think so. Another element of that is literally that of affordable housing. Single-family lots in the West Hills today are selling at upwards of $75,000. That is not a way by which to promote affordable housing for young individuals and young families. Denser housing is. Is it a favorite choice of all? Not at all. But it is a choice we'll have to make.
I agree. Thank you very much.
I'm pleased to be at the 4 microphone.
Thank you, sir.
Sold on your vision. Sign me up. Tell me, is there enough money to build the Westside Light Rail now? And if not, will you build less or find more money?
We have enough money We will build the first phase of it from downtown to Southwest 185th. It'll open in September of 1997. A year later, the continuation of that from 185th to Hillsborough will open. Money's our easiest problem. We got a lot of other things to do.
It's for you, not for me. Thank you.
Are you at the for or against microphone, Mr. Kalani?
It's down here. No, I'm for it. Yes, I'm for it. And I think the people here know. Clearly, we do not have enough money for everything. I think Measure 5 gave us an indication. Do you favor a diversion of resources from road expansion, not maintenance, not upkeep, not preservation, expansion, to transit? And more specifically, do you feel the TriMet has a proactive role in the transformation of the State Highway Trust Fund, which is definitely too narrow, to a transportation trust fund, where all modes compete on the basis of efficiency and economics?
When I hit your questions head on, do I favor a diversion of highway funding to transit funding? On a statewide basis, Ray, no. Secondly, what do I think about some overall funding levels? As I've said, they need to increase. Should we come to a single transportation trust fund in this state? Yes. If we change the amendment to the Oregon Constitution, which was adopted in, I believe, 1978, tomorrow morning, and opened up the Highway Trust Fund for all sorts of transportation improvements, my conclusion from having spent 8 years on that commission and the last 6 years dealing with transportation funding issues statewide is we wouldn't solve a single problem. The basic issue that exists in the state today is not the inflexibility in use of funds, it's inadequate funds. I would strongly suggest, particularly in this region, that we find a dedicated source of transit funding with its own trust fund, and perhaps a decade from now, when both highway needs and transit needs are adequately funded, each with a separate trust fund, we might very well combine those trust funds together to have one adequately funded trust fund. But the issue is not inflexibility, it's inadequate funding.
I'm Walt Roberts, member of the City Club, and I'm interested in your invitation to the City Club to become the sort of focal point for a process of forging and articulating a vision for the future. My question is, would you care to elaborate on what the key ingredients would need to be within that process? And if the City Club were to not accept the invitation, do you see any other process that would forge and align and articulate a vision such as you see the need for?
2 or 3 thoughts on that. If you accepted the challenge, I would urge you to do so, limiting at the outset your focus literally to the physical livable community. As I made in my remarks the comment, not at the neglect of any of the others, but if we make it so broadly comprehensive that we look at our physical livable community, the human and cultural and the economic, we will have had an enormous undertaking before us 10 years from now. As we think we're getting closure, just like Seattle is today, we'll get mowed down. Why do I suggest the City Club? In a sense, it's none of the above. If we were to run down the array of those who might do it, should it be Metro? Should it be some amalgamation of the 3 counties and 23 incorporated cities. Should it be TriMet? Should it be the Port of Portland? The conclusion I come to is that each has a vested interest and none will be accepted region-wide. I think the City Club, because of its unique stature, because of its ability to combine public and private interest, is literally the ideal choice to do it. I'd also say, as I go back through some of the research that this organization has done literally back into the 30s, you've done literally all of the substantive work. If anything, you've done it once over or twice over. And what this region needs is the real installation of someone saying with force and with clarity, we got to stop just planning and dreaming. It's time to get some agreement on what we want to do, and it's very much time to start to put that to action. I personally can think of no one better able to do that than the City Club. Jim would be a great one to lead the effort.
Don Williams, City Club member, in light of your advice on the role of the City Club and in light of the fact that there's currently a study on parking underway, could you tell us from your perspective what would you like some of their recommendations to be?
My favorite quiz as I sort of go around to various groups is to ask for the guess on how many parking spaces does anybody think might exist in this region. Because this is too large a group, and I can tell you the guess will be all over the map. Shorthand, there are 1.2 million registered vehicles in the region today. There are over 10 million parking spaces. And the number of parking spaces per vehicle is growing. The amount of land area consumed by parking and by road facilities within this region is right at 26 or 27% of the land area. We devote an incredible piece of our natural resource to single purpose. What would I like to do with parking? I'd like to preserve a lot of it. If I could wave a magic wand, I'd do the same thing we sort of do with sewer connections. The number of it's fixed. One of the great strategies for fostering the growth of downtown Portland came out of the effort in the mid-'70s when we put a cap on the number of parking spaces. That is literally anathema if you mention that in any other metropolitan area in the West. What, a cap on parking spaces? Why, you would dry up downtown in a second. It couldn't work. By my analysis, nothing has done more to invigorate and spur the growth of this downtown region than a cap on the number of parking spaces. I'd region-wide put a lid on. I'd put a lid for the same reasons we did in downtown, that it's an air quality issue. In my own personal sense is we would find much the same kind of thing happening region-wide that we saw downtown, that it works to our advantage, not to the detriment. And then I charge a hookup fee just like you do with a sewer system. Now, if you want to hear my radical notions about what to do with parking.
Kevin Kyler, City Club member. Two major construction projects on McLaughlin Boulevard between Tacoma Street and the city of Milwaukee have either begun or will be beginning shortly. I recently received a flyer from the Department of Transportation warning of terrible traffic delays for the next several years during the construction period. What, if anything, will TriMet be doing to increase bus service and to provide for buses as a feasible and preferable alternative for all those commuters who will be fighting this congestion?
You could turn to your right and tap Don Adams on the shoulder and ask him how many conversations we've already started about this. The interests of ODOT and TriMet in this region are literally identical. We each have as a mission providing mobility for people. As ODOT undertakes a major highway improvement project, I want them and I want all of you as citizens to turn to us and say, TriMet, what are you going to do as part of that? Not just in the interim when congestion is there, but long term to make that capacity go even further. We're going to respond. If you want a detailed plan on that, you got to wait and call me about a week or two from now when Bob Post and I can do a little more head scratching on it. We've addressed specifically what will happen on the west side. As you're aware, the Westside project is really a joint project, much like the one that went out the Banfield. order of magnitude, about 10% of the total project investment is highway improvements, 90% light rail. But as the highway improvements from the zoo out through the 217 interchange are taking place, this state's most congested corridor is going to become a nightmare. We are not, nor should we even think about, we as transportation agencies, think about literally inconveniencing to a gross extent the public during the 5 years of construction there. As the ODOT work in expanding the highway takes place, we will, in advance, have constructed with ODOT additional park and ride stations. I can't tell you the routes of additional shuttle service, but you'll see substantially expanded Westside bus service.
Doug Strain, City Club member. Tom, I'd be very much interested in your evaluation, now that we've had considerable experience with East Side light rail, as to how well that meets your vision and has met the vision for the East Side that you envision for the West Side, and whether it has caused this nucleation, this high-density development on the East Side. And I'd really appreciate your evaluation of the East Side light rail as it reflects upon what might happen on the West Side.
3 quick observations, Doug. As this region's first experiment in light rail, I think the East Side project has been highly successful. We carry 25,000 daily riders on that system. If we do the West Side line and carry only that level of ridership, would I call that a success on the West Side? No. What are the additional things, as we've seen the East Side, that we will learn from it? Probably 2. 1, additional work with local jurisdictions in land use, specifically creating and fostering greater densities and substantially more development at station areas is absolutely mandatory. Secondly, as an agency, we have to have the capability with our federal partners to make expansions of car capacity on lines on an annual basis. It takes as long today to order a light rail vehicle as it does a 747. That sounds crazy. I think it is crazy, but it's also the fact. At rush hour, we are at capacity on the Banfield Max line, and until new cars arrive, we're not going to be able to substantially increase ridership. Interesting facet of light rail construction, essentially about 10% of an initial project goes into investment in cars. For instance, as we go from here to Beaverton, approaching $1 billion system, 40-some cars will have $80 or $90 million in cars. You can double the carrying capacity of that line by doubling the size of the fleet. Put another way, you can double the carrying capacity for an additional 10% increment in investment. But the funding mechanism has to be there not to buy that double-sized car order at the beginning, but to add them annually as you need them, as capacity grows. And right now, that doesn't work in the federal funding schemes. We've got to correct it. Last comment in terms of success of the East Side line, our fare box recovery, that is to say the portion of operating costs recovered from fare box system-wide, is 26 or 27%. On light rail alone, it's 51%. The ability of that system, once the capital investment is made, to carry substantial numbers of people at a substantially lower cost per person is quite magical. So, first line, give it a high B+.
Tom, I have a written question here that will have to be our final one, but I think this one had to be asked. Does consolidation of local governments, that is expansion of Metro, have a place in your vision of the future? And I suppose one might ask, in addition to that, does assimilation of TriMet into Metro also have a place in that vision?
By preface, Jim, I think as an individual, I am one of the strongest fans of Metro that exists in the region. I worked with agency people there specifically for 4 years on the convention center with Andy Catugno and others. I've done transportation stuff for all of this decade. I'm a big fan. I'm a strong supporter of the work Hardy Myers is doing with the Charter Committee. Specifically to your, and we as a transit agency and ODOT as another transportation agency needs a forceful, aggressive, talented, and very strong metro. Do I think Metro ought to assimilate the operations of a transit district in the near future? No. I say that for, I hope, what are not turf reasons, but I'll give you a couple of very specific thoughts. Both these agencies are relatively young. TriMet, 22 years old now, Metro maybe 13 years old. Each have, for organizations of that age, incredible responsibilities heaped on their plate, very substantial undertakings over the next decade or two. We're each scrambling literally at, in some cases, pretty impressive paces to accomplish those things that we need done. I think the worst thing we could do for the land use, for the transportation, for some of the livability issues that we've talked about in this region is to say prematurely, in the hope of some vague efficiency, we ought to take Metro with its capabilities, TriMet with its capabilities, mesh them together, and to think that we'll get something even bigger out of them. General Motors has just figured out that if they get smaller, they'll get better. We might learn something from that. I want to thank each of you very much for this opportunity today.
And our thanks to you, Tom Walsh, General Manager of TriMet. We are adjourned.